Bilibili is essentially YouTube in China, filled with countless content creators and artists. Imagine all the art knowledge you've learned on YouTube and think about the fact that there's another hidden world out there, and yet it's completely inaccessible to anyone that doesn't speak Chinese. So I'll be attempting to bridge this gap by sharing with you what I learned on Bilibili that allowed me to finally understand how to properly paint the eyes. Now, this is the biggest coloring tip that I learned from Bilibili, and yet I've never really been explicitly told this in eye tutorials. This is that even if we are painting anime, which is in the 2D world, we still need to constantly think about things in 3D. So one of the first things we do for this first coloring step is to define the key structural components to the eyes, which will also guide us for the later steps. But just quickly, I'll let you know that I've actually shared all the brushes that I used in this tutorial for free in the description, along with all the layers files so that you can follow along as well. We are just using really soft strokes on this step, and don't be too afraid to blend around. We also define the outer edges of the iris since those are naturally darker. Another thing we do for this step is add the shadow caused by the projection of the eyelashes. And yeah, you can see what I mean by the fact that we still need to constantly think about things in 3D. Even if it's anime, always think 3D. This matters a lot for the later steps as well, which you'll see. Now naturally, another aspect of adding definition to the eyes is adding lighting. We can do this with a color dodge layer, but I just did this with a normal layer, choosing a color that's bright and a bit saturated. We refer to the structure of the eye when adding lights, and we can use this detailed diagram that the artist provided to guide us about where to add the lights to the eyes. As you can see, just aim to add brightness to the areas inside the orange circles, and you can't really go wrong. Remember and try to imagine the fact that the eyes are a sphere. This is why most of the glowy color of the light will be at the bottom section of the eye, since the eyelashes and the folds of the eye are blocking the top part of the eyeball. And then the reason why we still add some glow here is because if we imagine again that the eyeball is a sphere, then light coming from this direction will catch on this part of the eyeball. This is quite a simple step as we will be adding the more important type of lighting later on. This step is mainly to help add some more structure to the eye. You might not have noticed this before, but lots of artists paint this type of inner circle for the eyes, whether it's by shadows or highlights. This can make the eye look better depending on your own preference. These dark rings are mostly a stylistic choice, but you sure do see them in a lot of different anime eyes. The purpose of these dark rings is to highlight the circular nature of the eyes, but most importantly, this step adds more detail to the eyes. Which brings me to one of the most important concepts that I've learned about painting this style of anime eyes, which is that it's all about adding false detail. I've talked about this in one of my previous videos as well. This is super important, and I'll talk more about it later in the video. But I'd say that you can skip this dark ring if you like, depending on the type of eye you're trying to paint, since not all eye styles will have this feature, but almost all eyes need the other steps on this list. This step is such an important and general step that applies to all parts of the eyes. The iris, the sclera, and the eyelashes all need this. This will save your eyes from looking muddy when you shade them, and this step is to add color variation for the different parts of the eye. Firstly, when painting the eyelashes area, one tip that this video gave was to make sure you have the middle part lighter than the surrounding parts. Because after all, the eyes are three-dimensional, which means the eyelashes are also three-dimensional. So making the middle part a lighter color gives the impression that it's bulging out like it should be. But one thing is that we can use a lighter color while also using a different color. This is important to give more color variation to the artwork, since simply making the eyelashes more gray is pretty boring and can make it look muddy. As for the colors to pick for this color variation, a safe bet is picking something in a similar range of hues to your eyeball color. Just make sure the saturation is not higher than that of your iris. A very interesting thing the artist did is add color variation into this part of the eye, where you would normally expect a shadow from the eyelashes. This has the purpose of giving a very intriguing color variation and makes the eye look even more shiny. And I've also included the painting of the sclera, the white part of the eye, in this step. Because painting it well really depends on color variation. This is super important. I don't know about you, but the white part of the eye was something that I had always struggled to paint because it somehow always looked out of place or muddy. But adding some color variation is a good way to counteract this. Highlights are one of the most glamorous parts of an eye. Highlights vary a lot between different eye styles, and they can be a key defining characteristic of the eye. So it's important to paint this right. There are many ways to paint highlights, and many different types of highlights you can paint, depending on the style you're going for. Firstly, remember that highlights are simply reflections of the surrounding environment caused by the watery nature of the eyes. This is why they should be bright and sharp, because that's how light reflects off water. But for anime art styles, you can have a range of creative freedom with how you paint the highlights. The most common highlight shapes come in a circle, followed closely by an oval, but you can also see rectangles and even stars. And in the end, most shapes will work. But an important thing is that you should use a sharp brush for painting these highlights. Using a soft brush will just look muddy and won't give that shiny look to the eyes. When painting highlights, try to spread them out and try to have at least one of them overflow onto the sclera. This is a very common type of highlight you'll see. This is because it emphasizes the fact that the eye is still one big connecting sphere, even if the iris and the sclera look so different from each other. Now, here's the last step, which is also quite an important step for this style of anime eyes, especially for some other more unique anime eyes. And this is false detail. If you've watched my hard brush challenge video, you'll already have heard me talk about this concept a lot. When I say false detail, I'm referring to detail that doesn't necessarily make any sense in terms of the anatomy of the eye. Just stuff like random sharp lines. But these still have a big impact on the perceived detail. To utilize this concept, it's pretty simple. Basically, we just try to add as much detail as possible using a hard/sharp brush. The type of brush is important in order to make the eye look more complex and fancy. The reason we use a hard/sharp brush is because using a soft brush won't look as detailed. You can see this type of false detail prevalent in many types of eye paintings. When painting false detail, it's all about this type of loose, carefree painting style. It feels more like you're quickly doodling or sketching as opposed to painting. This step is also the one where we can just clean up the eyes a bit and make any refinements we want. For me, one main thing I focused on was making the eyes look less blurry, because I noticed that when I zoomed out, the eyes just looked a little muddy and blurry in some places. And that's because I had too many overlapping strokes and color changes to the point where it was almost like a gradient. Also, I adjusted the colors on some parts so that it's not too dark. You generally don't want the iris to have colors that are too dark. And remember to occasionally flip your canvas so that you can see things from a fresh perspective. I also made some other changes. Like, I decided that I didn't quite like the highlight that was added here, even though the original video did it, so I adjusted that. Remember, it's all about your own personal preference. And also, this is why having each element on individual layers can be useful, because it makes it a lot easier to adjust later on. And that was pretty easy, wasn't it? I hope that all the steps I've made were clear and easy to follow. Let me know what videos you guys would like to see next. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Anyways, thanks for watching.